Some people recharge in crowds. Others recharge in quiet. This video breaks down the real psychology behind why some people genuinely love staying at home, not out of fear or laziness, but because of how their mind and nervous system are wired. From stimulation levels to emotional safety, creativity, and self-awareness, this is a side of human behavior most people misunderstand. If home feels like your safe zone, this might explain more than you expect. Picture this. Your phone lights up at 6:47 p.m. It's a group chat. Somebody is floating the idea of doing something tonight. You can almost hear the enthusiasm through the screen, and you feel two things at once. A tiny, polite spark of, "Aw, they thought of me." A much bigger wave of, "Please, no." If that reaction makes you feel guilty, you're not alone. A lot of people who prefer staying home carry this low-grade shame like a background app that never fully closes. They'll say yes when they mean maybe. They'll say maybe when they mean absolutely not. They'll invent a headache, blame the weather, or pretend they didn't see the message until it's too late. Not because they dislike their friends, not because they're trying to be difficult, but because going out costs them more than it seems to cost other people. And that's the part most people miss. They think staying home is the absence of a life. Like if you're not out, you're not living. But for a lot of home lovers, being at home is not the void. It's the place where the nervous system finally unclenches. Let's talk about what's actually happening. When someone says, "I love staying home," there are usually multiple layers underneath that sentence. It's not just, "I like my couch." It's more like, "I like the version of me that exists when nobody is watching. I like the speed my brain moves at when it isn't being interrupted. I like the fact that I can breathe without performing, explaining, or adjusting." Because yeah, social life can be fun. It can also be loud in a way that isn't only about sound. It's loud in expectations. You're expected to react at the right time, laugh in the right places, ask questions back, keep the vibe up, not be awkward, not be too quiet, not go too deep too fast, not disappear, not leave early, not look bored. And if you do leave early, you're expected to make it cute. "I'm such a grandma, haha." Like you have to apologize for having a limit. Home is where you don't have to manage that. Now, people will slap a label on it and move on. "Oh, you're introverted." And sure, introversion is a big part of it for many people. Introverts aren't necessarily shy. They're not necessarily anxious. They just spend energy differently. Social time is like spending money. Even if you're spending it on something you like, the number still goes down. Being alone is how you earn it back. But here's where it gets more interesting. Preferring home isn't one personality type. It's a whole ecosystem of reasons. Some are simple, some are complicated, some are kind of beautiful, and some are heavy. So instead of acting like it's one thing, let's open it up. First, the obvious one, stimulation levels. Some people feel best when the world is turned up. Music, chatter, movement, different faces, new input. Their mind wakes up in that kind of environment. Other people feel best when the world is turned down. Not dead silent, not isolated forever, just softer, fewer variables, less chaos. If you're in that second group, going out isn't just going out. It's stepping into a place where your brain has to process a flood of tiny details. The lighting, the noise, the smell, the spacing, the timing, the social rules, the background music, the unpredictable interruptions, the way you can't fully relax because you're in public, and public has consequences. And if you're sensitive to sensory input, like genuinely sensitive, not dramatic, then a crowded cafe can feel like a full-body workout. Your brain is trying to filter everything, and it never stops. You can't unhear a loud laugh at the next table. You can't unsee the guy pacing behind you. You can't not notice the awkward tension between two people near the bar. Your system registers it, whether you want it to or not. At home, the input is curated. You choose the volume. You choose the lighting. You choose whether your environment is calm or energizing. That isn't laziness, that's regulation. And this is where control comes in. A lot of people who love staying home love it because home is predictable. Not boring predictable, safety predictable. When you've lived through enough moments where the outside world felt unpredictable, maybe you were bullied, maybe you grew up in chaos, maybe you've had relationships where you had to constantly guess what mood someone was in, predictability starts to feel like oxygen. Outside, you can't control the seating, you can't control who shows up, you can't control whether the plan changes 3 times in an hour. You can't control whether someone is going to bring up a topic that puts you on the spot. You can't control whether you'll have to pretend you're okay when you're not. You can't control whether you'll be pressured to stay longer than you want. You can't control whether your no will be respected. At home, the boundaries are built into the space. You can rest without negotiating for it. That's one of the reasons home is such a powerful recharge zone. It isn't just quiet, it's permission. And honestly, the permission part matters more than people admit. Because if you're someone who's constantly monitoring your own behavior in social settings, how am I coming across? Am I talking too much? Not enough? Did I sound weird? Did I overshare? Did I seem cold? Did I smile enough? Then you're running a second conversation in your head while the first one is still happening. That second conversation is exhausting. People call it overthinking, but it's often just hyper-awareness. And hyper-awareness can come from temperament, sure. It can also come from a history of being judged, or a history of having your feelings dismissed, or being the kid who learned early, if I don't read the room perfectly, something bad happens. For those people, staying home isn't just comfort, it's relief from constant self-editing. Now, there's another angle that doesn't get enough love: depth. Some home lovers aren't avoiding life, they're choosing depth over surface. They don't want to spend 3 hours exchanging the same 10 sentences with 10 different people. They'd rather spend 3 hours on one conversation that actually goes somewhere, or 3 hours thinking, creating, reading, building something, getting lost in a story, learning a skill, reorganizing their world, or just being. They find meaning in quiet patterns that other people don't even register. The ritual of making coffee the exact way they like it, the comfort of rewatching a show that feels like a soft blanket for the brain, the weirdly satisfying moment when the apartment is clean and the air feels lighter, the calm of hearing rain hit the window while you're inside and warm, the tiny dopamine hit of changing into comfy clothes the second you get home. These things look small from the outside. From the inside, they're like little "I'm safe" signals. And if you've ever felt like your nervous system was a little too awake out in the world, those signals are not childish, they're medicine. But okay, let's address the big fear people have when they hear this topic. Is this healthy or is this hiding? Because there is a difference. Some people stay home because it genuinely fills them up. They go out sometimes, they just don't crave it the same way. They come home and their shoulders drop. They feel more like themselves. That's preference. Other people stay home because going out triggers something. Their mind runs worst-case scenarios. Their body gets tense. They dread being perceived. They dread mistakes. They dread awkwardness. They dread rejection. They dread the moment they walk in and feel like everyone's eyes are on them, even if nobody cares. That's not a preference. That's fear driving the car. And here's the tricky part. From the outside, these two people look identical. Both of them are at home on Saturday night. Both of them are declining invitations. Both of them are busy. But inside, one is calm. The other is clenched. So, you have to ask yourself a very honest question. When you choose home, do you feel lighter or smaller? If it's lighter, you're probably regulating in a healthy way. If it's smaller, like your world is shrinking around you, that's a sign to look closer. And I want to be careful here because the internet loves to diagnose, but we can talk about patterns without turning it into a label. For example, some people love staying home because they've had enough of social unpredictability. They don't hate people, they hate social roulette. They hate the part where you don't know what version of the night you're getting. Maybe it's fun. Maybe it's draining. Maybe it's easy. Maybe it's awkward. Maybe everyone shows up on time. Maybe you're stuck waiting. Maybe the conversation is interesting. Maybe it's 10 minutes of talking about nothing and then 2 hours of pretending you're not bored. At home, you can choose the version of your evening. You can choose calm. You can choose stimulation. You can choose quiet. You can choose a deep dive into a topic. You can choose to do nothing and not have to justify it. And that ability to choose is not trivial. It's the same reason people who have stressful jobs often become very particular about their home environment. When you spend your day being interrupted, managed, evaluated, and expected to respond instantly, your brain starts craving a space where you are not on call. So yeah, you might love staying home not because you're antisocial, but because you're over-socialized. There's also something else: identity. Some people feel more like themselves at home because the outside world makes them act. Even if they're not lying, they're editing. They're playing a version of themselves that fits the room. At home, you don't have to be interesting. You don't have to be on. You can be quiet without it being interpreted as rude. You can be in your own head without being accused of being checked out. You can have a face that isn't smiling and nobody takes it personally. And if you've ever been told you're so quiet, like it's a problem to fix, then home starts to feel like the one place where quiet isn't treated like a defect. Okay, one more layer. Some people enjoy staying home because they actually like their inner world. This sounds obvious, but it's rare. A lot of people are uncomfortable alone because alone is where their thoughts get loud. They need external stimulation to escape their own head. But if you're someone who can sit with your thoughts without panicking, solitude can feel rich, like a private room in your own mind, like you're finally in a place where your brain can wander without being interrupted. And that wandering is where creativity often lives. Not the "I'm a tortured artist" thing. Just the real mundane truth. When the brain isn't reacting to external input every second, it starts connecting dots. It starts rearranging ideas. It starts noticing patterns. It starts making something out of nothing. Some of the best thinking happens when you're doing something boring at home. Folding laundry, washing dishes, staring at the ceiling for a minute. Your mind quietly sorts itself out. That's not wasting time. That's the brain processing life. Now, before we go any further, I need to say something that sounds small but matters. Loving home doesn't mean you don't love people. A lot of home lovers are incredibly loyal. They just prefer fewer relationships, deeper ones. They don't want constant contact, they want meaningful contact. They'll show up when it matters. They're not the person at every party. They're the person who will pick up the phone when you actually need help. And because they don't spread themselves thin, they often have more emotional bandwidth for the people who are truly close to them. But because society is loud, it rewards loudness. It rewards visibility. It rewards being out there. It treats staying home like you're missing the party called life. Sometimes, staying home is simply choosing not to audition. And I'm going to stop this first part here, because the next section gets into something deeper: how childhood, attachment, and past social experiences shape the love for home, plus how to tell when home is soothing versus when it's becoming a trap. That part is long, and it deserves space. So consider this your first big chapter: preference, regulation, control, depth, and the right to be off stage. There's a moment a lot of home-loving people remember very clearly, even if they've never put words to it. It's the moment they realized that being out required a version of them that felt slightly misaligned. Not fake, just adjusted. Like wearing shoes that technically fit but rub in places you can't ignore. Maybe it happened in school. Maybe it happened at a family gathering. Maybe it happened at work. Maybe it happened the first few times they tried to be more social because everyone said they should. Whatever the setting, the feeling was the same. I am doing something right now that looks normal from the outside, but costs me more than it seems to cost everyone else. That realization changes people. Because once you notice the cost, you start calculating it. And if you're someone whose energy isn't infinite, you start choosing where to spend it. Home becomes the place where the meter stops running. Now, let's talk about something people get uncomfortable with: emotional safety. Home is not just a physical space. For many people, it's an emotional perimeter. It's the one place where you don't have to anticipate reactions. You don't have to brace for misunderstanding. You don't have to be ready to explain yourself. Outside, there's always the possibility of friction. Someone interrupts you. Someone misunderstands your tone. Someone reads into what you didn't mean. Someone jokes in a way that lands wrong. Someone expects a response you don't have ready. Even small moments of friction add up. They don't ruin your night individually. They just slowly drain you. And here's the thing most extroverted or high-stimulation people don't realize. Not everyone experiences social friction as neutral. For some people, friction is loud. Their body reacts before their brain does. Heart rate goes up, muscles tense, thoughts speed up. They start monitoring themselves more closely. That doesn't mean they're weak. It means their nervous system is tuned to notice shifts in social energy. If you grew up in an environment where moods changed fast, or where you had to read people carefully to stay safe, that tuning becomes second nature. You don't turn it off just because you're an adult now. You can override it sometimes, but it's always there, scanning. Home is where the scanner powers down. And that's why telling someone like this to just go out more is like telling someone who's exhausted to just run a marathon you'll feel alive. You're ignoring the starting point. Another piece people rarely connect is boundaries. People who love staying home often have stronger internal boundaries than they get credit for. They know where their limits are, or at least they've learned the hard way. Maybe they've said yes too many times in the past. Maybe they've overextended themselves socially and paid for it later with burnout, irritability, or emotional numbness. So now they're selective. They don't want 10 shallow hangouts. They want one that actually feels worth the energy. They don't want to go somewhere just because that's what you do. They want a reason, meaning, comfort, depth. And when there is no reason that feels compelling, home wins by default. This isn't avoidance. This is prioritization. But of course, from the outside, it looks like absence, and absence gets judged. There's a quiet cultural belief that if you're not visible, you're failing at something. If you're not out socializing, you're missing out. If you're not constantly accumulating experiences, you're wasting time. That belief hits home lovers hard, because a lot of them already question themselves. They'll sit on the couch feeling perfectly content, and then suddenly feel guilty about feeling content. Like peace itself is suspicious. Like if you're not striving or posting or participating, you're doing life wrong. That guilt doesn't come from within. It's learned. And it's reinforced constantly. Social media doesn't help. It turns social life into a highlight reel. It makes it look like everyone else is always out, always laughing, always surrounded by friends, always living in motion. You don't see the exhaustion behind the smiles. You don't see the forced conversations. You don't see the hangovers, the regrets, the social burnout, the "I need a week alone" aftermath. You just see movement, and movement gets equated with meaning. But meaning doesn't require movement. Sometimes it requires stillness. There's also something else that deserves attention: autonomy. Home is one of the few places where you can exist without negotiation. You don't have to compromise on pace. You don't have to match anyone's energy. You don't have to wait for consensus. You don't have to go with the group. If you want to change what you're doing halfway through the evening, you can. If you want silence, you take it. If you want stimulation, you choose it. That autonomy is intoxicating for people who feel drained by constant adaptation, especially people who spend their days adapting. If your job requires emotional labor, customer service, caregiving, management, teamwork, conflict resolution, then your emotional battery is already being used before the weekend even starts. By the time Friday night comes around, the idea of more interaction feels less like a reward and more like unpaid overtime. Home, in that case, isn't antisocial, it's recovery. Now let's talk about something people rarely say out loud. Some people don't feel truly seen in groups. They might be liked, they might be included, but they don't feel known. Group dynamics often reward quick responses, humor, surface-level connection. If you're someone who needs time to process, or who thinks in layers, or who doesn't jump into conversations easily, you can end up feeling invisible even while surrounded by people. That invisibility hurts quietly. So home becomes the place where you don't have to fight for a turn, where your thoughts can exist fully, where you don't feel rushed to package them into something palatable. And if you've ever left a social event feeling lonelier than when you arrived, you understand why staying home can feel like self-respect. Now, there is an important distinction here. Some people love staying home because they love their life. Some people love staying home because they don't feel like they belong anywhere else. Those two experiences overlap, but they are not the same. If you stay home and feel grounded, energized, content, curious, peaceful, that's a good sign. If you stay home and feel numb, stuck, isolated, or trapped in your head, that's information, not judgment, just information. And the reason this matters is because the internet tends to romanticize both extremes. Either staying home is painted as self-care, or going out is painted as growth. Reality is messier. Growth sometimes happens in solitude. Healing sometimes happens in quiet. And sometimes, yes, comfort becomes a hiding place. The difference isn't in the behavior, it's in the emotional aftermath. Do you feel restored or reduced? That question keeps coming back for a reason. Another angle that rarely gets discussed is how much social energy depends on context, not personality. Someone can be deeply home-oriented and still light up in the right environment. They might hate bars but love one-on-one walks, hate loud parties but love long dinners with close friends, hate spontaneous plans but love scheduled, intentional time. When people say, "You never go out," what they often mean is, "You don't like the kinds of environments I like." That doesn't make you boring. It means your nervous system has preferences. And here's something subtle but powerful. People who enjoy staying home often have a strong sense of internal validation. They don't need constant external stimulation to feel okay. They don't need constant feedback. They can sit with themselves. That scares people who can't. So sometimes the judgment you feel isn't about you at all. It's projection. It's discomfort with stillness. It's confusion about how someone can enjoy a life that looks quiet from the outside. Quiet doesn't mean empty. Quiet can mean spacious. And in that space, a lot of things happen that never show up on a highlight reel. Reflection, integration, rest, creativity, emotional processing, perspective. These things don't photograph well, but they matter. I want to pause here before moving into the next section, because the next part goes deeper into how childhood experiences, attachment styles, and early social conditioning shape the love for home, and why some people feel physically calmer inside their own walls. That part is heavier, more psychological, and longer. It deserves its own space. There's a reason some people feel a physical sense of relief the moment they close their front door. Not metaphorical relief, actual relief. Shoulders drop, breathing slows, jaw unclenches. Thoughts stop racing quite as fast. That response doesn't come out of nowhere. A lot of people who prefer staying home didn't just wake up one day and decide the outside world was overrated. Their nervous system learned something over time. It learned where it could rest. And very often, that learning starts early. If you grew up in an environment where you had to be alert, where moods shifted, rules were inconsistent, or attention was unpredictable, your body adapted. It learned to scan, to anticipate, to stay one step ahead. That adaptation might have helped you then, but it doesn't automatically switch off later in life. So when you're out in the world as an adult, surrounded by people, your system does what it learned to do. It stays on guard. Not because something bad is happening, but because something could happen. At home, that could disappears. This is why some people feel calmer alone than with others, even people they like. It's not about trust in the person, it's about trust in the environment. Home is predictable. The walls don't change mood. The furniture doesn't judge. The silence doesn't demand anything. That consistency allows the nervous system to stand down. And when you spent years in standby mode, that feels like freedom. Now, this doesn't mean everyone who loves staying home had a rough childhood, but patterns matter. If you were the kid who learned to self-entertain, self-soothe, self-regulate early, solitude probably feels familiar, comfortable, almost nostalgic. You didn't learn that people are unsafe. You learned that you could handle things on your own. That independence can be a strength. It can also quietly shape your preferences. You don't crave constant company because you were never wired to rely on it for emotional stability. And here's something that doesn't get said enough. People who are comfortable alone often had to be. They didn't always get to be messy in front of others. They learned to process internally, to think before speaking, to hold things in. So now, as adults, their inner world is well developed, rich, complex, busy in a quiet way. They don't experience silence as empty. They experience it as full. This is one reason staying home can feel productive even when nothing is happening. Your mind is doing work that isn't visible. Another layer here is attachment. Some people are wired to feel safest when they are self-contained. They don't avoid intimacy, but they don't need constant reassurance either. They feel secure in their own company. Others learned that closeness came with strings attached, expectations, emotional labor, unpredictability. So they enjoy connection, but only in doses, only when it feels chosen, not demanded. For these people, staying home isn't isolation, it's selective engagement. They're not cutting themselves off from the world, they're protecting their emotional bandwidth. And that word bandwidth matters, because emotional bandwidth is finite. When you use it all on managing interactions, there's none left for reflection, creativity, or rest. People who love staying home tend to be very aware of that limit, even if they can't explain it logically. They just know when they're done. And instead of pushing past that point to prove something, they retreat. They choose recovery over performance. Now, let's talk about the social pressure piece, because this is where a lot of internal conflict shows up. Even people who genuinely love staying home sometimes feel like they should want something else. They'll say things like, "I know I should go out more," or "I should be more social," or "I don't want to waste my life." That should usually isn't theirs. It's inherited from a culture that equates social visibility with success. If you're not out networking, socializing, attending, participating, you're seen as stagnant. And if you're stagnant, something must be wrong. But that logic assumes everyone gains energy from the same sources. It assumes growth only happens through exposure. It ignores the fact that some people grow inward before they grow outward. For someone like that, staying home isn't retreat, it's incubation. Ideas need quiet to form. Emotions need space to settle. Identity needs room to breathe. If you're always reacting, you never get to listen. And this is where a lot of people misunderstand home lovers. They think, if you stay home too much, you'll miss opportunities. But what they don't see is that many home-oriented people are constantly evaluating which opportunities are actually worth the cost. They're not scared of life, they're selective about it. There's also a creative angle that rarely gets framed properly. A lot of creative people, writers, thinkers, designers, planners, problem solvers, gravitate toward home because creativity needs uninterrupted time. It needs mental wandering. It needs boredom, oddly enough. When your environment is constantly stimulating, your brain stays reactive. When it's calmer, it becomes generative. That's why so many ideas come in the shower, or right before sleep, or during quiet evenings when nothing is happening. Home creates that mental space. And it's not just artsy creativity. It's problem-solving, emotional insight, life planning, self-understanding. People who love staying home often understand themselves better because they spend more time with themselves. They notice patterns, they notice moods, they notice what drains them and what restores them. That awareness doesn't come from constant distraction.
Now, let's address something uncomfortable, but real. Sometimes staying home is about avoiding being perceived. Being perceived is work. It's being seen, interpreted, judged, even subtly, even kindly, even unintentionally. For some people, being perceived feels neutral or even energizing. For others, it feels invasive, like their inner life is being exposed when they didn't consent to that. This can come from many places: past criticism, being misunderstood, being told you're too much or not enough, being labeled early and never quite escaping that label. So home becomes the place where you don't exist for anyone else's interpretation. You just exist. That relief is hard to give up. But again, there's a line. Avoiding being perceived can protect you. It can also shrink your world if it turns into avoidance of connection altogether. The key difference is whether you still allow yourself meaningful connection on your terms. Do you let people in selectively, or do you keep everyone at arm's length because visibility feels dangerous? That question matters, and it's okay if the answer changes over time. Some people go through seasons of heavy retreat, burnout seasons, healing seasons, grief seasons, seasons where the outside world simply feels like too much. During those times, home isn't a personality trait, it's a cocoon. And cocoons are not permanent residences, they're transition spaces. But society doesn't do nuance well. It loves labels. If you stay home, you're antisocial. If you go out, you're living. Reality is far more fluid. You can be deeply alive in your living room. You can feel completely dead in a crowded room. So much of this comes down to alignment. Does your environment match your internal state? People who love staying home often feel misaligned in environments designed for constant stimulation. Their internal pace doesn't match the external tempo. That mismatch creates friction. Home lets them set the tempo. And when you finally live at your own pace, something shifts. You stop chasing energy. You start conserving it. That conservation isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I want to pause here again, because the next section moves into a very important distinction when staying home becomes a shield against growth, and how to gently tell the difference without shaming yourself. That's where a lot of people get stuck, loving home but secretly worrying they're hiding. That deserves careful language and honesty. There's a subtle shift that happens when staying home stops being a choice and starts being a rule. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't feel dramatic. It just creeps in. Invitations get declined automatically, without much thought. Not because you weighed the options, but because the idea of going out feels heavier than it used to. The outside world starts to feel farther away, like something you observe rather than participate in. This is the part that makes people uneasy, because it's harder to talk about without turning it into shame. So let's be very clear. Loving home is not the problem. Losing agency is. The difference is simple, but not always obvious. When staying home is healthy, it feels chosen. You think about going out, you decide against it. You feel okay with that decision, maybe even relieved. There's no spiral afterward, no self-judgment, no "what's wrong with me" loop. Just peace. When staying home becomes unhealthy, the decision feels automatic. You don't really choose it. Your body chooses it for you, driven by avoidance, fear, or exhaustion that hasn't been addressed. And afterward, instead of peace, there's a low-grade discomfort, restlessness, a sense that your world is getting smaller. That feeling is important, not because it means you're doing life wrong, but because it's a signal. A lot of people ignore that signal because they've been told their whole life that wanting to stay home is already bad. So instead of listening to the nuance, they either fully justify it or fully attack themselves for it. Neither helps. What helps is curiosity. For example, are you staying home because it restores you, or because leaving triggers anxiety you don't know how to regulate yet? Those two things can coexist, by the way. You can genuinely enjoy being home and still be avoiding certain experiences because they feel overwhelming. Humans are layered like that. Another useful question: do you still feel capable of going out when you want to? Capability matters more than frequency. If you can go out, but you don't want to most of the time, that's preference. If you want to go out but feel blocked by dread, that's something else. And again, that something else is not a moral failure. It's information about your nervous system, your experiences, your current capacity. One reason staying home can quietly turn into avoidance is burnout. Burnout doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like withdrawal. Your system is overloaded, so it starts cutting input. Social interaction is one of the first things to go because it's complex and unpredictable. In that state, home feels like the only place where demands stop. The danger is not staying home during burnout. The danger is staying burned out without addressing why. Another reason is unprocessed social pain. If you've had repeated experiences of feeling misunderstood, excluded, talked over, judged, or dismissed, your brain learns a pattern. Social situations equal discomfort. Even if nothing bad is happening now, your body remembers. So it nudges you towards safety. Home becomes a shield. Shields are useful, they're not meant to be worn forever. But here's where it gets tricky. Sometimes the world doesn't actually feel safer when you stay home long term. It just feels smaller. And smaller can feel safer in the short term, but it can also feel stifling over time. That's the moment many home lovers quietly hit. I love my space, but I don't want my life to shrink to it. This is where growth comes in, and growth doesn't always mean go out more. Sometimes it means changing how you go out. For example, instead of forcing yourself into environments that drain you, you experiment with lower stimulation connection, walks instead of bars, one-on-one conversations instead of group events, daytime plans instead of late nights, short commitments instead of open-ended ones. Growth doesn't require betrayal of your nature. It requires respect for it. Another thing worth mentioning: some people confuse boredom with peace. This isn't common, but it happens. If you stay home and feel dull, disconnected, scrolling endlessly, waiting for time to pass, that's not restoration, that's numbness. It looks like rest, but it isn't refueling you. True rest leaves you clearer, not emptier. That's another signal worth listening to. Now let's talk about the social narrative again, because it still plays a role here. People who love staying home are often told they'll regret it later. That one cuts deep. It suggests that quiet lives are inherently wasted, that memories only count if they happen publicly. But regret doesn't come from staying home. Regret comes from living in a way that isn't aligned with who you are. Some people regret going out too much. Some regret chasing approval. Some regret never listening to their own limits. There is no universal path. The real risk is not staying home. The real risk is never questioning why you do what you do. And that applies to extroverts too, by the way. Plenty of people go out constantly to avoid being alone with themselves. That's not healthier. It's just more visible. Balance doesn't mean equal parts home and social life. It means responsiveness. You respond to your needs as they change. Some seasons call for retreat.
Some call for expansion. Staying home is not a personality flaw, it's a strategy. The only question is whether it's still serving you. And here's something people rarely talk about. You can love staying home and still want your life to feel meaningful, expansive, and connected. Those are not opposites. Meaning doesn't require crowds. Expansion doesn't require noise. Connection doesn't require constant presence. It requires intention. If your home life is intentional, filled with things that nourish you, challenge you, grow you, then staying home can be deeply life-giving. If it's unintentional, filled with avoidance, numbing, and passivity, then it deserves attention. Not judgment, attention. I want to end this part on something grounding. You don't owe the world your exhaustion. You don't owe anyone a performance of sociability. You don't owe proof that you're living enough. Your life doesn't need to look loud to be full. But you do owe yourself honesty. And that honesty is what leads into the final part. What it actually means to honor a low-stimulation preference in a high-stimulation world, and how to build a life that feels rich without betraying your nature. If you've made it this far, there's a good chance you recognize yourself somewhere in this. Not in a dramatic, this explains everything way, but in a quieter, more uncomfortable way. The kind of recognition that feels accurate rather than flattering. So now comes the real question. What do you do with this? Because understanding why you love staying home is one thing. Building a life that honors that preference without shrinking your world is something else entirely. And that's where most advice fails. Most advice is built for people who gain energy from stimulation. It assumes that more exposure equals more growth, more people equals more fulfillment, more activity equals more meaning. So when that advice gets handed to someone who's wired differently, it feels like being told to live in a climate your body isn't designed for. You don't need to become someone else to live fully. You need to design differently. Let's start with something practical. Redefine what a good life looks like for you. Not for the algorithm, not for your friends, not for the loudest voices online. A good life doesn't have to be busy. It doesn't have to be social by default. It doesn't have to be visible. It has to be satisfying. And satisfaction for home-oriented people often comes from a few core elements: autonomy, depth, predictability with flexibility, meaningful connection, not constant connection, enough stimulation, not too much. When those elements are present, life feels full, even if it looks quiet. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to force themselves into normal social patterns instead of creating ones that actually work for them. They say yes to things that drain them, then wonder why they feel resentful. They push past their limits, then blame themselves for burning out. They try to outgrow their nature instead of working with it. That never ends well. A healthier approach is to build low-friction connection. Low-friction connection means you minimize the parts of interaction that drain you and maximize the parts that nourish you. That might look like shorter social commitments, clear start and end times, one-on-one interactions instead of groups, environments you can control or leave easily, activities with built-in structure, walking, cooking, watching something together, fewer plans, chosen more intentionally. This isn't selfish, it's sustainable. Another important piece is learning to trust your own rhythm. Home lovers often have a slower social metabolism. They need more time between interactions to reset. That doesn't mean they're antisocial. It means they process experience deeply. If you're someone like that, back-to-back plans will exhaust you even if each plan is enjoyable on its own. Your system needs space to integrate, to come back to baseline, to feel like yourself again. So instead of asking, why can't I keep up? Ask, what pacing actually works for me? That question alone can change everything. Now let's address the fear that sits underneath all of this. What if I'm missing out?
This fear shows up in quiet moments, on weekends, on holidays, late at night. It whispers that maybe everyone else is doing life better, that maybe you're choosing comfort over growth, that maybe one day you'll look back and regret all the nights you didn't go out. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You will regret something no matter how you live. Every path has trade-offs. If you go out constantly, you might regret not resting, not listening to yourself, not building depth. If you stay home often, you might regret moments you didn't experience. The goal isn't zero regret, it's aligned regret. Regret hurts less when you know why you chose what you chose. If you stay home because it genuinely nourishes you, that's a grounded decision. If you stay home because you're afraid to step into the world at all, that's a different conversation. And the only person who can tell the difference is you. Another thing worth naming, home lovers often carry a quiet intensity. They're not loud, but they're deep. They feel things strongly. They think things through. They notice subtleties. They build rich internal narratives. They care deeply, even if they don't show it performatively. That intensity doesn't disappear just because you're not out there. It shows up in different ways: creative work, emotional insight, loyalty, thoughtfulness, observation. The world needs that kind of energy too. Not everyone is meant to be visible. Some people are meant to be stable. Some are meant to be reflective. Some are meant to hold space quietly. There is dignity in that. But dignity requires ownership. If you love staying home, own it without defensiveness. You don't need to explain yourself endlessly. You don't need to make jokes about being boring. You don't need to apologize for your limits. You can simply say, "That doesn't work for me," and mean it. And if part of you wants more connection, more experience, more expansion, you can pursue that without betraying who you are. Slowly, gently, on your terms. You don't have to flip your personality upside down to grow. You just have to stay honest. One final thought, and this matters. A lot of people who love staying home are actually very alive inside. Their inner world is busy, rich, meaningful. They don't need constant stimulation because they're already engaged. That's not emptiness, that's self-sufficiency. So, if you're someone who finds joy in quiet evenings, familiar rituals, controlled environments, deep thoughts, and selective connection, you're not broken, you're not failing, you're not behind. You're just wired for depth over noise. And in a world that never stops shouting, that might be one of the most grounded ways to live.